Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So I've been working on this Figma component for a while now. No, I keep defaulting to the first thing I list on share screen and goes to the whiteboard sometimes. And so as I'm considering putting this component in the pajamas Figma library, I want to be able to make it easy for designers to show or hide the color swatches. So where I was thinking about having this land would be underneath messages, defaulting to being hidden, and then this like color picker section being in the input box, also default to hidden, but you could go into it and show it if you're working on that area. The only downside to it is it doesn't really work great for like responsiveness. So I don't know how to make these rows wrap, if that's even possible. I don't think it is, but I was curious to know if you all thought that architecture of the Figma component itself makes sense.
I'm just guessing here, but on a kind of a side note, I think the wrapping is possible using the auto layout.
Okay.
I could be
All right.
wrong because I know Figma is, web-based, and I believe that auto layout is just using kind of a mix of display and flex properties.
Okay.
But that doesn't
right.
answer your original question.
No, it's possible. I don't think I have tried to modify this since auto layout came out. So let me play with it some outside of this and see if I can get that to work. But
Jeremy might be a good contact for that. I think he spent some time working in there and coming up with a lot of good auto layout stuff.
Yeah,
I
I've
have a ton
gotten
of
some
problems with it. It's always been a struggle for me to figure out auto layout.
Yeah, I've gotten some feedback from Jeremy and Nadia just on the component itself. Really, I'm just trying to replicate what we already have in GitLab because I got really tired of making the color picker. So I assumed somebody else would probably get tired of it too. Maybe Alexis, but I was just hoping to at least get this in there so we could stop copy and pasting probably the same thing over and over again.
Yeah, Austin, I think as far as I think as far as hiding it, I think that's pretty standard. I've seen it in a lot of other components, even like it kind of reminds me even just the regular form input field, right? We hide the error text and message text. Was that your concern of just hiding that whole area there?
Yeah, because I want to make it a part of this component. So I want when you go in here that you could open up messages and find color swatches. Just by default, it's going to be hidden. So that way, if you need it, it's there for you because that's where it shows up in our UI. But I wasn't sure if anybody else had thoughts on it being a part of the input text or anything else generally. So this is kind of like what the comparison would be.
Gotcha.
But yeah.
Yeah, I would check with Jeremy too. Then I think that's a good idea, just because.
Yeah,
I know Jeremy has some thoughts on where where to draw the line, maybe if it's adding too much bloat to the component, But I don't know how common of the case this is. So.
Yeah, I mean the only place it's currently used in GitLab today are when creating labels, and if you're creating a compliance framework. You can assign a color to those label objects. And so that's where you get this recommended color picker underneath your input field.
Gotcha.
Okay, yeah, I mean, that's helpful. It gives me some good ways to move forward, and I'll see if auto layout can help me make it responsive. That'd be pretty dope. So
let us know what happens too, if you would, please.
Yeah, I will.
One thing that I noticed, at least when I was playing with auto layout, is the way that the layers are labeled and not labeled, wherever they're in the hierarchy of their order has a bit of a problem with that too. Like if you put something at the top, it wraps things, even though it's not physically above any content for some reason. So that was my only other experience with that.
Yeah, I'll keep playing with it, Daniel. It's good to keep in mind. Daniel, did you want to talk about settings?
No. Yeah. So I've linked it to like the Figma file, and not the primary epic that the settings work is originated from, but one that specifically deals with the re-engineering and redesign in the UX work that Hayana and Michael Lay are working on. And I had this initial thought of like, well, what Austin had mentioned about like how should settings behave, the standard behavior, what should the settings do. I was thinking, well, something that Mike had mentioned previously was how they're written, the vocabulary, the way that the message is written has a lot to do with the way they're sort of interpreted and also implemented, and also with the context of writing it from the affirmative or from the positive voice or something like that. I thought maybe that would be an interesting way to go about and relook at everything. But if I jump down to point C, that maybe the MVC that I should be thinking about, or the first steps that I should be thinking about, would at least be bring parity between the environments first before we start rewriting things. And that's something that I've already been started as well with the bring the admin screen from selfmanaged.com. I'll share the screen real quick. So I had already done like an inventory of all the settings in the admin screen and tried to define what's a GitLab environment setting, what's a hardware environment setting, or what overlaps. So things like this, overview or monitoring, and then within the settings panel. So this is the admin screen, and this is the settings link within the admin screen. And then so trying to break things out, and I've gotten a lot of feedback from the support folks, which is really helpful. And so then I just recategorized everything, trying to think of how we could reorganize it, breaking things down. The initial proposal was to try and minimize the stuff in the left-hand nav. And so if we're merging those environments, that can kind of help. This was kind of like a first pass at that, and then the new settings. But yeah, this was kind of separate work from the cascading settings that we were talking about. But that was what I was thinking of, that first maybe just bring parity between the environments before we try and re-architect everything. So I don't know if I'm necessarily looking for like specific feedback or just kind of like giving FYI to anybody, but if anybody has any tips or ideas.
Could you help illustrate for me what bringing parity looks like?
Yeah, let me see here. I think my environment works. So let's see. Currently, if you look at the top level group, this is the settings you have within the .com environment. And so if you go to top level group, you should have the same, but you don't have this admin area.
Right.
The idea is that we want to attach this and these settings to some place in this screen. So either add it here as another item.
I gotcha.
So there's that idea of parity. But then also if you look at specifically the settings where you have all of this, you more or less have some of the same settings where you have the naming, the visibility, the permissions. One of these days. But that was what I was saying, is that there's not parity between the environments, mostly because of the problem where some of the settings in the .com environment don't exist here, or they just don't make any sense here, specifically like the hardware environment settings.
Right.
Still, okay, well, this will be a problem. Oh, there we go. But some of this stuff, because it's more higher level, it's external to a specific group container. So all of these things don't exist here, right? You only have a limitation or a smaller scope of those. And so that's sort of what I was saying about bringing parity for this sort of thing. So import sources, obviously that makes sense to bring over here if you want to have an import source for your particular group or environment. But yeah, does that help illustrate the problem?
Yeah, it does help. That's going to be hard. I trust you.
Well,
Yeah,
and that's
'cause
what I was
it's
doing.
tricky because like you said, the admin area is such a hodgepodge of like hardware settings and like GitLab specific settings and yeah.
Well, and that's what I was doing with the Figma file, going through there and trying to categorize everything to try and see what made sense to at least bring over logically. Luckily, I got a lot of feedback from the support folks. Cynthia, it's been very helpful. But yeah, that's sort of what I was thinking about right now.
Gotcha. I had added a comment more tied to your initial thing you were discussing about the cascading settings from the visibility section between groups and subgroups. I had a Loom link this morning. I was just talking through the different options in that one section because there are like 3 different inheritance styles, and then potentially like a 4th with the way that you guys are building out the enforcement piece. So I would love to get to some sort of default like you're outlining that we can extrapolate and scale to other areas, which will probably need to rely on better UI copy to adopt that inheritance cascading enforcement model to make them all like read correctly and then make sense logically. Because right now it is such a spaghetti mess. It's very confusing. And we actually ran into a bug with this that was reported. I think it was around like enabling or disabling restrict committers from like unverified accounts or something, and teams expected it to cascade down to projects and it didn't, and then they had this like security risk, I guess, and so now we have to go tackle that. But if we had defined a better enforcement model, then an inheritance model, then we wouldn't have that bug today. So
yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking about, going through and looking at the settings to see how they're written, because I think a lot of the problem is based around that, is that the way that they're written doesn't necessarily translate because of the problems, the way that it's not really defined on the enforcement, or the way that we have that setting logically defined within the environment. Kind of like what you're trying to bring up. This Loom file that you linked, is this a new one? Because I remember seeing the other one that you had done.
yeah, I just did this one this morning. It was more like me thinking through it. So I don't know who else would benefit from it. It was just me talking through it myself. And I thought, well, might as well in case it's helpful for somebody else. But yeah, I was just kind of comparing and contrasting them for myself to see like, okay, if I hit checkbox on this one, how does it behave here? If I check this one, how does it happen? If I uncheck this one, how does it affect this one? Yeah, it's quite the experiment to figure out how GitLab works.
Just when you figured it out, somebody changes something.
So Mike, I see you had a couple of comments. The first question, was there an issue about parity in the environment? So yes, there is. I don't have it off the top of my head, but I can link it here, the agenda, once I figure it out.
Cool.
And then specifically, the problem is not an individual problem apart from make the settings screen better. And so the direction for that is multi-pronged, which we kind of all know. But at least from access perspective, bringing parity to the environment, the cascading settings were the 2 that I was looking at and trying to work around with. So that's sort of where the problem that I'm trying to solve. But as it moves up to the bigger problem, the main problem we're trying to solve is to try and, again, 2 issues actually: clean up the left-hand nav and also clean up the settings environment, or the settings screens, because they're kind of related. You know, the left-hand navigation is full of stuff. A lot of it's settings, and we're trying to clean that up. That's also the issue with moving members that I had discussed with y'all. Should members exist? Should it exist on its own? Should it exist in settings? Should it exist in the overview? So again, all these issues are kind of related. So yeah, does that help answer?
Does. When I hear, make something better, There's a lot of possibilities there. I see this epic was created by Hyana, and I see all of the issues associated with it. And it's all solutions. I don't see, maybe if I click into it and read the paragraph or the description, I might see a problem statement, but yeah, there's a lot of risk in just trying to make settings better rather than identifying a problem or problems, prioritizing the problems and then pursuing solutions. And what I'm seeing now is just a big bucket of potentially really good ideas.
What I've heard
Why I ask.
is there are just a number of features basically tucked away in the admin area that .com users can't benefit from. And so I think that's where the problem originates is I want to be able to do these administrative things that you can do in a self-managed environment. But because I'm on .com, I can't.
Yeah, thank you for reminding me. Yeah, I lose sight of what the original problem is when I see a lot of the like lower level things. So I appreciate that. Really love to see it documented though, because I was reading the epic, didn't see that. Yeah, that's kind of where I would expect to see that. The re-architecture epic.
Okay.
So I just linked the originating epic that might have more details for you.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
And so
is that the one you have highlighted there?
The one that says main settings epic.
Setting. Oh no. Main setting. Oh, gotcha. Thank you. I'll share my
So that one might have
it.
more historical or information that you're looking for.
Yeah, it's just a parent of that one.
Yeah, I would agree.
Oh, this is a parent of the other one?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, I could have clicked up to the ancestor. Okay.
So yeah, I do agree that the one that I had initially linked is just a bucket of solutions.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of why I was like, okay, this is what I was looking at as terms of like specific that we're doing, specific issues that we're doing.
Yeah, it's still the way it's worded. I don't see a problem articulated. It's still very general. Maybe it's in the ancestor of this one. Prioritization and scope. We have recently received feedback from customers expressing difficulty in discovering, finding, and recalling where to find specific settings within GitLab. Okay, that's good. And then, yeah, I think clarity around the proposal. And I think if I understand it, it's make the settings for features that are currently in admin accessible to .com users. And is that why we're talking about the cascading stuff, or is that a totally separate concern?
Yes and no. So one of the things being that we want to offer this, it's not necessarily a new feature, it's more a clarification of what the feature should do or what it should be.
About a particular setting or a category of settings?
Just as the settings in general, just because of what Austin had made a comment, how they had implemented something, but then it didn't work as expected because it was assumed that it worked off of some inheritance that didn't exist. So because we don't have a defined inheritance model or a way to do enforcement of inheritance of settings or behaviors, that needs to be added as a feature. But that kind of ties into this as well. Maybe not directly because it's not redoing the settings UX, and it's more about the GitLab environment and some of the problems that exist because of this weird assumed inheritance that's not actually an inheritance.
Okay.
But as it exists, that since it's tangentially related, might as well just kind of connect the dots anyways, as well as it would make sense in this if we're going to be, first of all, bring parity between the environments, because if you bring over the admin settings, a lot of that stuff does actually cascade down because you're dealing with the environment, not so much a .com group. And that's kind of where the connection could be.
Okay. I mean, it looks like a sort of a roadmap has been laid out here in the main epic. Conduct UX research to understand baseline findability and usability. And that's this epic. And phase one, first step is checked off. Understand how users expect to access settings. It's been checked off. That's this one. And this is still open. And it looks like, I don't know if there's been much movement on it, but I think that I don't think we want to take on settings improvement and the cascading thing at the same time, just because of scope. I mean, I'm just talking out loud. Does anyone agree that those two things are pretty big in, or this is really big in scope and we might want to focus on a smaller problem than this? Or continue to pursue this and leave the smaller things aside for now?
I don't know what Access's prioritization roadmap looks like. So I'll leave that one up to Daniel. I know for compliance, the cascading settings is routinely a question that's brought up.
Yeah, it's kind of high priority for us because we've already defined well, not yet because we had this big engineering spike, but we have the work already defined in the back end of how to implement this and how we want to provide a front end for that so that users can interact with it. And so we can start getting data off of or getting feedback on this feature.
Yeah.
And so as we move forward, we're going to try and implement that to all the settings. But that's where it connects to that epic that I linked, is that, well, if I'm going to implement this across the environment to all the settings, I want to make sure that I'm jumping in at the right place at the right time, and just instead of coming in ahead of everyone or after the fact saying, oh, wait, you got to do everything over again because we're doing this enforcement of global settings.
Why do we need to do the cascading in all of the settings?
It's not so much defined in all of the settings. It's strictly an inventory first of which settings should be cascading. And that's sort of what I was trying to do with the bringing parity between the admin screen and .com, because that feels like the natural progression.
Okay, and so we have an inventory of which settings need to cascade?
Well, right now, again, this is only like the initial proposal was that delete project or project deletion enforcement, because we needed one touch point to get into the back end to connect the dots to see, does this functionally work? Can we provide a front end experience for a user to test this and get the NVC out, right? So in terms of categorizing it or doing it for the rest of the environment, that's sort of where I'm relying on everyone else to say, hey, I have also a setting that needs to be done cascading or whatnot. And that's where Austin and Michael Lee have been really helpful about that. And so again, it's a collaborative thing, but again, that's why I wanted to say, if I look back at this other settings epic, I want to make sure that I'm joining in or doing the work with everyone at the right place at the right time, and not just saying, I'm doing this cascading project and it's done now and you have to go redo all the work you've done already.
Yes. And I wanted to say why the cascading thing is important to me is we have customers on the compliance side that ask for a setting from the project level to be exposed at the group level. But because we don't have a defined pattern in pajamas, which pattern do we copy? How do we know what's the right direction to go? So the one video I just posted about Loom, I talked through these different ones. So like prevent sharing your project, disable email notifications, and enable delayed project removal all have different inheritance models. Prevent and disable these two here will inherit, but if you're a group owner, you can modify this one, but you can't if you're a group owner for this one. It can only be modified at the group level. And then enable delayed project removal only affects children projects, but not subgroups and projects of those subgroups. So then it becomes a challenge, because then you have to do things like add an enforcement option, which then leads to issues with things like this, where you have users trying to deselect, reject unverified users in project settings push rules, and then expecting that reject unverified be off, and then it's not inheriting right because there's no defined pattern. It's confusing users about like did my setting affect all the projects that I intended it to, or does it not? I don't know. Sometimes you're given some language that tells you that this is going to affect all subgroups. Other times you're not told. You're not told here necessarily that it's going to inherit and show up and be disabled and not be uneditable. So that's why it gets confusing, is there's not a predefined way to do this. And I want a pattern, which is why I'm trying to find a way to write it as an MR for pajamas.
Yep, I agree.
It's confusing.
Well, it looks like the settings is owned by the same stage group that's working on navigation. And I think they're currently focused on navigation. That's the editor group. So it kind of feels like that's on hold, and we just have to keep our problem space more narrow for now. And for the cascading thing, let's take it one problem at a time rather than all of it. Looks like Holly ducked out because we're at time. But thanks for coming, everybody, and thanks for coming, Libor. Hope to see you again next week.
Thanks everyone for the help.
Thanks, everyone.
That's great.